I like to make one big word order decision first, but not always. What you often get, I don't know what paths your lives will take you on, but hey, I don't know. Farmers who grow wheat know that shepherds watch these 10 white sheep. So that's kind of cool. Welcome. We are about to talk about word order. Everything to do with word order and conlangs. Well, actually, we're going to be talking about word order in natural languages, word order typology, and the correlations between different kinds of word orders. But you can use it to apply to conlangs if your heart so desires. If you do not know me, my name is Conlang. Welcome. This is a channel about language and linguistics and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So if that's your kind of thing, well, join me. Let's go. So we're talking about word order today. And let's scoot over to the side. I've written a little sentence that will illustrate some of these points that we're going to talk about. Okay, so farmers who grow wheat know that shepherds watch these 10 white sheep. It's a bit of a, probably not a sentence anyone would say. But hey, I don't know. I don't know what paths your lives will take you on. Farmers who grow wheat know that shepherds watch these 10 white sheep. But this has a lot of constructions that will show the different kinds of word orders that we have at our disposal. So the first thing that I like to do whenever I'm starting a new Conlang project is, well, first of all, as long as it's meant to be a naturalistic Conlang, I like to make one big word order decision first, which is, do I want to have verb-object word order or object-verb word order? And this choice ends up being one of the most highly correlated with other kinds of word orders. So you can usually predict a lot about a language based on whether it's a verb-object or an object-verb language. So what is this verb-object versus object-verb? So let's take English, for example. English is a verb-object language. So we have a long sentence here. Let's make a little short one. Shepherds watch sheep. So here we have a subject, shepherds, a verb, watch, and an object, sheep. So because we can just sort of ignore the subject for now, we'll come back to it later. But because we have the verb preceding the object, so occurring to the left in the linear order, we call the English a VO, or a verb-object language. We can also have other kinds of languages. I'm just going to use English words for all of these, just so that we don't have to get into glossing or anything. But we're going to make English into an OV language. So what would that look like? Well, one option would be to say something like, shepherds, sheep, watch. So here we have, keep in mind that these sentences are meant to mean the same thing. So shepherds are doing the watching, sheep are being watched, and the action, the verb, is watch. So SOV, this is a VO language, and this is an OV language. Great. And so there are lots of VO languages, lots of OV languages in the world. According to one typological database that I consulted, it is roughly 50-50 if you count language by language. So that's a good first choice. When you're starting a new Conlang project, is it going to be a VO language or an OV language? And it turns out that actually, once you've done that, if you're trying to stick to sort of the most common combinations of features, a lot of other decisions get pretty easy to make. So let's take a look at some of those now. First, we can talk about the order of adpositions and nouns. I don't have any adpositions in my example sentence. Well, okay, that's fine. Let's continue our OV and VO pseudo-Englishes. So let's take OV and put it over to the left. Maybe even farther over to the left. And we have our VO here. Okay, good. So if you have an OV language, you are overwhelmingly likely to have an order like this. So shepherds, sheep watch, Say we had an adpositional phrase. An adpositional phrase is like a prepositional phrase, except when we say preposition, we're sort of implying that it's coming before the noun. It's pre-posed. So if we are in an OV language, we're overwhelmingly likely to have postpositions. So we could say something like shepherds, let's say shepherds Spain in, sheep watch. And this would be synonymous with the VO example, shepherds in Spain watch sheep. So the relevant phrase here, this is our adpositional phrase. Our postpositional phrase is Spain in. In the VO language, we have a prepositional phrase in Spain. And postpositions, so we can say postpositions are associated with OV with very, very, very high likelihood. And we also have, oops, let's arrange some columns here. We also have prepositions in VO. So these are very, very closely related. In one database that I looked at, and I'll put the papers that I've used as the source for these numbers in the description. But it's all work by Matthew Dreyer, who is a great source for this kind of thing. We have, if you have an OV language, you have about a 97% chance of having postpositions. And if you have a VO language, you have about a 92% chance of having prepositions. So that's not to say that there aren't exceptions, and you can still have a naturalistic language if you are falling into these exceptions in the 2% and the 8%. But if you need a default, if you have an OV language, your first thought might be prepositions. Postpositions. If you have a VO language, your first thought might be prepositions. And that's sort of how I approach this this question of looking to typology to make decisions about conlanging. It's just sort of gives me the first thing to think about, and then I can change my mind on it or decide to buck the trend in something. Okay, so then what else do we have? Another thing that is quite strongly associated with one type of these languages is situations where you have the complementizer. So let's give you an example sentence first. I know that shepherds watch sheep. So our complementizer here is this word that. So in VO languages, I think 100% of the time in the sample that I looked at, or in the database that I looked at, have complementizer followed by the clause. So I know that shepherds watch sheep. Rather than what you often get, but not always, with OV languages, you might get something like I, shepherds, sheep, watch that. No. So we have the complementizer here appearing to the right. So we have something like clause plus complementizer. And maybe I should write these little percentages. Let's move away from like the exact numbers and say how likely, roughly how likely. If you look at, if you just take a random VO language and you look at some of these other orderings, how likely are you to see this, to see prepositions, for instance? And we can let's give it a plus. No, we can't do that in Google Sheets without incurring the wrath. So we have to do a little workaround. So plus prepositions. So I'm just going to totally unscientifically use a scale of plus to plus. Okay. And then postpositions, it's another plus. And clause plus complementizer is it's about 50-50. So we can say it's even. Even odds. Looking at the chat here, did I swap clause and complementizer? I don't think so. Clause, shepherds, sheep watch. That's the embedded clause that I mean. Should be clear about that. Embedded clause plus complementizer, complementizer plus embedded clause. So we have the embedded clause, shepherd, sheep, watch, and then the complementizer that for OV languages. But keep in mind, this is roughly 50-50. So you can have OV languages that have this structure as well. So something like I, that, shepherds, sheep, watch. No. Both are fine. Well, both are about equally likely. Okay. Oh, and going back up the chat, would the directionality of adpositions have any indication for the other word order features? Say a VO language with postpositions is more likely to have X than a VO language with prepositions. That's a good question. I don't have that data off the top of my head. One thing you could do if you're interested in finding out the answers to these questions is to go to WALS. And if you're not familiar with WALS, WALS stands for the World Atlas of Language Structures. Let me see if I can just get it up on the screen here so you can basically see what it is. The URL is wals.info, wals.info. We'll put the link in the description to this. And we can look up features. Let's see, it gets nicer font size for you. We can go look at word order. Register the click, please. And you can do things like slice and dice these different features, order of adposition and noun phrase. You can then try and find intersections with other features. So order verb, object and verb. So this will show us the association between the two pretty strongly. Okay, so you can see a nice little map. It's super cool. And then you can go down to the legend to get a sort of a number of the languages. So here our intuitions are confirmed that prepositions in VO have a ton of languages and postpositions in OV have a ton of languages. There are other orders. There are, to answer another question from Yoru up above, how about both prepositions and postpositions? So there are cases where you have no dominant order, you have both. These are generally lower numbers of languages, and they aren't sort of in the classic, I don't know, the classic correlations that we look at which just sort of take the clearer cases. Anyway, so you can go and do this kind of research yourself. You have to do a bit of manual work to do the stats and everything, but it's kind of fun. And you get maps, which is always good. Okay, so back over here. Oops, nope, that's not for now. That's for later. Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about complementizers and embedded clauses. The Raven's asking, the whole relative clause is like an adpositional clause. Yes, yeah, a relative clause is like an adpositional clause, whereas this kind of clause, I know that shepherds watch sheep, is acting more like an argument of no. So it is the whole clause is kind of the object of no. Okay, so moving on to what's another one we've done? Adpositions we've done, complementizers. What else are we going to do? Let's do relatives. Yeah, we just talked about relative clauses. So farmers who grow wheat. Oops. Let's start with VO. So if you have a VO language, you're almost certainly going to have the order of noun plus relative clause. So farmers who grow wheat. The way in which you make relative clauses may not be using a relative pronoun like English. There are lots of ways. That's a topic for another day. But but we'll use this as an example. So you're overwhelmingly likely to have this word order. So let's give it a plus, plus, plus. And let's say this is noun plus relative clause. However, if you go over to OV, you're only about 50% likely to get noun plus relative clause. So you could get relative clause plus noun, or you could get noun plus relative clause with roughly equal frequency. So we would have something like we would have something like wheat grow who farmers. The position of the relative clause, we can talk about that maybe on another day. But wheat grow who farmers, or farmers, and then something like wheat grow who, or who grow wheat. Let's just say it could be either. I don't want to, there's a sort of a can of worms I don't want to open there, because relative clauses are very complicated. Okay, so what else do we have to talk about? Here's another good one. Demonstratives and nouns. So demonstratives and nouns, this is something like these sheep. So it is likely that you have something like these sheep in OV languages where the demonstrative precedes the noun. So demonstrative plus noun. And that is moderately preferred. So maybe we can just put one plus in front of it. Whereas in languages that are VO, you are more likely, and we'll put 2 pluses in front of it, to have the order of n plus dem. So noun plus demonstrative, what would that look like? Sheep these. And it's interesting, you can see that many languages don't fit these sort of ideal types where you have the so-called perfect VO language. If you chose the most common choice for each one of these, you would get something that actually doesn't occur in English, which is a VO language. Sheep these. So that's kind of cool. All right. And what else do we have to say? Okay, the most important one of all. Well, maybe. They're all important, but this is important too. Verb subject order. So, if you have an OV language, let's go over to our OV language, you are almost certainly going to have verb subject order. So it's a VS, a language, no, sorry. I said that absolutely in reverse. You are going to have almost overwhelmingly likely subject verb order. So this gives us the familiar SOV pattern that Turkish, Quechua, Korean, Japanese show. And so then here we have something like shepherds sheep watch rather than sheep watch shepherds, giving us something like OVS. And for VO languages, it's not quite as stacked in one direction. So you do usually get subject-verb order, but you also sometimes get verb plus subject order. And this, if we have a VO language, which also has SV, you get an SVO language, which is another very common type. So shepherds watch sheep. And if you have a VS language and a VO language, then you usually get VSO. So something like watch shepherds sheep. Less common. About 28% of the VO languages also have VS. And so this gets us the familiar whole clause word order VSO This gets us the familiar whole clause word order SVO, and this gives us SOV. And those are the three most likely, the three most common word orders that we usually talk about in typology. All the rest are much, much less common. SVO, SOV, extremely common. VSO, less so, and then everything else way, 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 way down. Yeah. Let's see if we... Yeah, so as Raven points out, English has mixed head directionality. Head directionality is sort of a theoretical construct that we use to describe these kinds of phenomena. So you'll see that used out there in the literature. And actually, a lot of languages have this mixed directionality. They don't all fall into this idealized VO type of language or idealized OV type of language. But it is a kind of good place to start when you're starting a new project. I often like to consult these rough frequencies to give myself a sense of how outside of the statistical statistical norm that I want to put the language. For instance, it would be quite naturalistic to go along with most of them and then switch, say, noun demonstrative. Say you had a VO word order and you switch the noun plus demonstrative order to be demonstrative plus noun. Well, you'd have something like English. And that's perfectly expected. Although if I want to do something that's more radically different, I would change more of the directions. So that, I think, hopefully is kind of a lightning tour through some of the biggest word order correlates. There are some other ones, which I think I'll probably do as a sequel to this one because I'm learning that people like shorter videos. But we can talk about correlates within the noun phrase. So things like what happens when you have demonstratives, numerals, adjectives, and nouns. How do they all work together, and how does that correlate with other things? But I think this gets us in a good spot. So I'll put back the full screen and thank those of you who are watching on YouTube later. If you enjoyed this content, watched all the way through to the end, thank you very much. And yeah, be sure to like and subscribe. I think I have to say that. Because more will be coming. Okay. So hopefully that's a sort of a more evergreen topic for people who are wondering if there's some kind of, if there are some kind of rules or some kind of guidelines for naturalistic conlanging. There are and there aren't. I think that you can use these kinds of statistics to give yourself a naturalistic feel, although I would argue that a lot of these frequencies are not due to any sort of deep facts about the nature of language, but it could just be about which languages happen to spread and have lots of descendants. You may have noticed we were counting the individual languages and not related groups of languages, which you might expect would bias things, right? If you have a family that has 20 languages versus a family that has 2, if every language in that in the big family, say the proto-language was SOV, and none of the descendants have changed, do we really want to count that as 20 SOV or just 1? And so you can make arguments for both of those, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff if you're a typologist. But if you're a conlanger, you can feel perfectly content just saying, okay, well, I think I'll just take the numbers.